Hello friends, welcome to One Day One Answer initiative of GS Core. Today's subject is Indian polity and the theme that we'll be discussing today is federalism. The theme that we'll be discussing today is federalism. So there are questions asked in mains on federalism and specific aspects of federalism. So what we'll first do is we'll go into those specific aspects, and then after that I will take up a PYQ and we'll discuss a PYQ. So if a question has to be asked, if a question basically has to be asked on federalism, so what are the questions and what should be your general response? I will also provide you with general response to it. I will provide you pointers with it, on the basis of which what you can do is you can explore those points and write answers or formulate your answers. Alright, so first question will be oriented towards nature of Indian federalism. Nature of federalism would be the first type of question that basically you can expect. Alright, when you talk about nature of federalism, what has to go in? First and foremost, definition of federalism has to go in. Now when I talk about definition of federalism, what is it? It is two sets of governments in a country. Two sets of government in a country with specific powers to each set mentioned in the constitution. That is basically federalism. India is a federal country. So first and foremost, we have to showcase that India is a federal country by providing the definition and showcasing 7th schedule of the Indian constitution, where basically the power structure of both central and regional governments are stated. After that, what you have to move towards is knowing the quasi-federal nature of Indian governmental structure. Alright, when I say quasi-federal, that means in India, even if it is basically a federal country, it is not like a typical federal country like United States. Alright. We see orientation of power being more towards center, and there are specific reasons for it. So first and foremost, you have to know that India is a quasi-federal country and power orientation is more towards center than to the states, and you have to also know the reasons for the same. You have to basically also know the reasons for the same. Even if we have adopted federalism, then why we have adopted a specific type of federalism that has been oriented towards Canadian model rather than United States ka model. That has to be known by you. Second point that you have to keep in mind is evolution of Indian federalism. How basically Indian federalism has evolved. यहाँ पे ना you have to first and foremost look into reasons why India adopted federalism, and basically how the reasons have evolved, and hence the characteristic feature of Indian federalism has evolved. Reasons for evolution. Alright, so first and foremost, if we look into it, now Indian federalism evolved because India basically is a very large country. It has a large diversity. There are people or communities who want stake in power, and it is all not possible with a single power center. Alright, hence we went for federalism, but we did not orient ourselves towards linguistic federalism. Then what happened was we moved towards linguistic federalism. Alright, and in that you have to take into consideration why basically in the initial years there was reluctance towards linguistic federalism, but then we adopted it, and once we adopted it, we settled in it. Also, what has to be taken into consideration when you look into evolution of federalism in India, now one important point, and basically on which questions are recurring, is fiscal federalism. We'll look into it. Today's question is based on fiscal federalism. Take it. If we look into today's federalism, now it is basically more oriented towards resources. It is more oriented towards finances that can be distributed between the center and the state. Alright, that can be basically distributed between center and the state. One more aspect that you have to take into consideration while studying federalism and then writing answer on evolution of federalism is Panchayati Raj institutions coming of PRIs, and basically what role have they played in the structure, what role have they played in the dynamics, in the power dynamics between center and state. Here what will happen is centrally sponsored scheme will also come into play, because through centrally sponsored scheme what has happened is a bridge is created between central and local self-government bodies, and to an extent what has happened is state governments have basically left out not in that sense कि they have been completely left out, but हाँ, the relation, nature of the relation has basically changed. In terms of evolution of federalism, now what I also want you to know, or what I also want you to focus upon, is reforms. Okay, I'll write down over here reforms that are needed, that are basically needed for the future, and how reforms in Indian federalism, and what are the committees and commissions which have basically proposed those reform. For example, Niti Aayog has proposed a reform with respect to Indian federalism. Finance Commission, 15th Finance Commission has recommended looking into 7th schedule and power distribution. तो ये सारी चीज़ें हैं ना, with respect to reports, with respect to committees, that has to be kept in mind, and how Indian federalism can evolve for good, that has to be with you. Those particular points have to be with you. Then coming to the role of specific institutions. For example, the role of governor. The role of governor in Indian federalism. How governor basically plays a dual role of being the head of state in the state administration and also being representative of the center, and how his political affiliation basically has not committed the office to being neutral. ठीक है, what are the reforms expected? What were the recommendations provided basically by Sarkaria Commission and by Punchi Commission? With respect to the reforms that can be brought to the office of governor. Again, what we see is new offices evolving with respect to, say, interstate council. Their importance has increased. Then we also have zonal councils. We also have to take into consideration the existence of Niti Aayog and the way it influences the federal relations in India. Also Finance Commission. And in the end, those institutions which are in a way at this point of time said to have created a strain between central and state government. What are the powers related to them? What are their responsibilities? And what are the problems because of which it is said that through these institutions, central government is basically interfering with the state governments. Which are those institutions? We have CBI and we have Enforcement Directorate or ED. Alright, Enforcement Directorate of ED. Obviously, through this we should not be hypercritical of the central government. We just have to showcase constitutional framework and whether these organizations or institutions are following constitutional framework or not, and if not, basically what is the way out of it, so that federal relations in India basically are not compromised. In the end, you have to talk about judiciary. Okay. The questions with respect to federalism may be oriented even towards judiciary. Why? The reason for that is judiciary is the neutral empire between central and state government. Alright, judiciary is the neutral empire between central and state government. The judiciary has to come in, and judiciary mainly will come in when you have to provide a way out. Judiciary mainly will come in when you have to basically provide a way out. So, questions on federalism basically are divided in three parts: nature of federalism, evolution of federalism, and then different institutes that have impact on federalism. Overall, what we see is, in federalism, the question will basically be focused upon problems related to federalism, maybe in general terms and maybe in specific terms. Okay. So maybe a specific problem with respect to federalism may be asked on the basis of role of governor. Okay. And then what they will seek is, they will basically seek a way out. Okay. That will more or less be the nature of question. Other is, of course, as I told you, question on fiscal federalism, how resources are to be divided between center and state, what are the problems related to the same, and what is basically the way out, how resources could be better divided between the center and states, and which institutions or which offices basically can come to the aid. यहाँ पे ना special focus has to be given on interstate council, zonal council, and most importantly finance commission. Most importantly it has to be the finance commission. With respect to nature of federalism, power dynamics, ठीक है, again category of the questions will be same. Are the powers of the states been compromised? What is the way forward? In this way forward, of course, what has to be taken into consideration? Which institute will play a major role? Which institute plays the role of safeguarding the federal structure of India? How it is the neutral empire, that is judiciary. Of course, mention of Rajya Sabha is wanted because it is council of state, तो उसके बारे में भी लिखना पड़ेगा. And to a certain extent even law commission, because law commission in a way keeps recommending how Indian federalism should basically evolve. ठीक है. So this is the overall structure. These are the pointers on the basis of which your answer is expected. Your answer basically is expected. ठीक है. Now let us go to one PYQ. Let us now go to one PYQ where the focus has been on evolution of federalism. All right. Focus has been on evolution of federalism. So the question reads, how far do you think cooperation, competition and confrontation have shaped the nature of India's federation? Cite some recent example to validate your answer. Okay. So the point is simple. First and foremost, deal with this concept. Which are those concepts? Cooperation, competition and confrontation. ठीक है. So cooperation is obviously where state and center, or center and where basically state and center and some states specifically come together for the purpose of benefit, for the purpose of welfare of the people. Competition is where states try to corner resources for themselves, ठीक है, by performing better, by basically providing a better deal. Confrontation is when they basically in a way fight each other, of course constitutionally, where they basically fight each other, assert themselves. ठीक है. Border disputes is one of the ways in which confrontation between federal units happen. देखो, federal units and confrontation does not mean confrontation only between center and state. It also means confrontation between the states. All right, it also means disputes between the states. So we have to first and foremost take, these terms have to be triggered. The meaning of these terms basically have to be triggered. Now coming to the answer itself, the answer has to begin with the definition of federalism, which I have already provided to you. What is definition of federalism? It is a government or a governmental system where what do we see? Set of two governments. One which is central and other which is regional. In India we call it state governments. In India we call them state governments. All right. Nature of any federalism, after you define federalism, then you have to showcase the nature of federalism. So here what they are putting out is how cooperation, competition and confrontation have shaped the nature of federalism. So what does overall shape the nature of federation in any country? What are those values, what are those ideas which are important for the purpose of shaping the nature of any federation? So obviously they are socio-economic and political conditions of a country. So mention this. Socio-economic and political conditions of a country, what they do is they create situations through which either federating unit will cooperate, they will compete with each other, or they will confront each other. All right, they will confront each other. So these three things have to be mentioned in the introduction itself. And these three things basically are based on socio-economic and political conditions existing in a particular country. Now we come to cooperative federalism. Cooperative federalism. So cooperative federalism basically is where this term was provided, or this term was brought into mainstream by, of course, Niti Aayog, so mentioned that. So cooperative federalism is where federating units cooperate for welfare of people, betterment of the country. ठीक है. With respect to cooperative federalism, what do you see is development of a collaborative framework, and whose responsibility basically it is? The responsibility lies majorly on central government for the purpose of providing this framework. ठीक है. Though if you take into consideration implementation of it, implementation is with state government. Majorly it is with state government because state government is closer to the people, and hence most of the schemes or most of the programs are implemented through state governments. ठीक है. Most of the schemes are implemented through state governments. What do you see over here? We see over here central government taking into consideration needs, requirements and resources of the whole country, and through it basically developing a plan which will be instrumental in development of the country. We also see when we talk about cooperative federalism, now what we also see is special emphasis being paid to those particular states which have lagged behind because of no faults of theirs. ठीक है. And it is appreciated by other federating units also if a special assistance is provided to them. This is cooperative federalism. This basically is cooperative federalism. Cooperative federalism is also when what we try to do is different units, federating units, they align their policies in such a way that the country looks as a one whole, mostly and mainly policy wise and economy wise. ठीक है. If we have to provide example for cooperative federalism, then GST is the best example basically of cooperative federalism. GST basically is the best example of cooperative federalism. Other than that, 73rd and 74th amendments 73rd and 74th amendment are also examples of cooperative federalism. When it comes to competitive federalism, when it basically comes to competitive federalism, here what do we see is states, it is mainly states that compete it is basically states that compete or have competitions amongst themselves for allocation of resources. It is states that compete for the allocation of resources. ठीक है. This model basically has gained prominence since the time of liberalization. To liberalization, what has happened is foreign investment and investment in general has been coming to India, has been made in India, and states have competed against each other. States basically have competed against each other for the purpose of getting most of it. What do we also see with respect to competitive federalism is, state not in a way getting into each other's area and creating a dispute, but promoting themselves. And this has provided for an opportunity where India has proved to be a good investment destination. So states have competed amongst themselves, they have brought in best practices, by showcasing how efficient investment in their region could be, and thus promoted economic development and growth of India. And lastly, we can say confrontational. With respect to competitive federalism, now you can use examples of programs like Vibrant Gujarat, Resurgent Rajasthan, ठीक है, Niti Aayog providing SDG index, SDG index in India. ठीक है, so these are the ways in which competitive federalism is visible. ठीक है, competitive federalism is visible. Ease of doing index with respect to the states. So what they showcase is we are better than others. ठीक है, remember with respect to competitive federalism, state do not get into each other's area. They focus on their own development. They focus on their own promotion. They focus on their own showcasing. On the other hand, when it comes to confrontational federalism, what do we see? What do we see? Federalism. What do we see? We see disputes or confrontation between federating units. Now these disputes may be with respect to allocation of financial resources. This could be with respect to exercise of jurisdiction. This might be with respect to, this also might be with respect to creation of a new state. Alright, this might be in case of 2 or more states. It might be also with respect to water disputes. It might be also with interstate river water disputes. It might be also with respect to, take into consideration, border disputes of the state. ठीक है, so यहाँ पे what happens is one federating unit, ठीक है, resources of one federating units, aspiration of one federating units, they are directly in clash with other federating units, and what has to be done? Those disputes have to be settled in constitutional manners through the institutions provided by the constitutions and the institutions provided by other statutes. For example, interstate councils, Supreme Court, zonal councils. So that has to be your answer. When it comes to providing example on confrontation federalism, what has to be done? What basically has to be done? You could provide the example of Article 370 and the way in which political leadership of Kashmir has argued that it has created dispute when it comes to the legal status or political status or federating status of Jammu and Kashmir. Also, what you can do is you can provide for some interstate border disputes, interstate border dispute and interstate river water disputes. That can be provided as examples. That basically can be provided as examples. In the conclusion, what you have to maintain is confrontation in federalism will exist. Confrontation in federalism in any working structure will exist. What has to be basically done is that confrontation has to be aligned, or this confrontation has to be settled through the institutions provided, and our move should be towards competitive federalism to an extent and more towards cooperative federalism for development and welfare of people of India. Alright friends, thank you so much.